You're watching Booze Hackers.
All right. Hello, Jeremy.
How's it going?
Good. So I picked up some whiskey.
Okay.
Went to the store. I was very tempted to get a few that are over $30. I know you said $30, but I kept it under.
Yeah.
With everything I got 7 whiskeys, 7 American whiskeys. Some of them are bourbons. Some of them are made outside of Kentucky, so they're not bourbons. They're American whiskeys.
So actually, we'll get into that definition right there.
I think I understand how that works. I'll be interested to see if I'm correct on that. I've always heard growing up that bourbon can only come from Kentucky, so I'll be interested to hear if that's true. So some of my favorites, I went into the store and I found out are $31.99. Like they're just over. And what's interesting is that some of the ones you got were those ones that are over $30 for me. But because of alcohol tax differing in states and I don't know what other factors there are and
distribution, all sorts of things, shipping.
Yeah, I have no idea. Maybe maybe there's a bunch of factors I don't know about. But some of the ones that you're going to be drinking, I couldn't get under $30. So I wasn't able to include those. So while you're reading the news, I've got 7 glasses in front of me. Each has a sticky note underneath it with the writing on the backside with the stickiness. So I'm not going to know what I'm drinking. I'm doing a blind taste test of these 7.
Okay.
They're all between $20 and $30. There's no super cheap like Evan Williams white label or black label in there. They're all between $20 and $30. Most are right on the cusp, like $29.99. And so I'll be making some notes as I try those out while you explain terminology to us.
Okay, awesome. Well, and it's interesting that you said that because I think I was actually at the liquor store buying some stuff, and you had texted me and said, "Oh, we should bump this up to 35." And I'm like, "Oh no, if we bump it up to 40, then we get into some really good stuff." And so I bought a couple, and I already had a couple that I was going to throw in. And the one I did not do that you kind of mentioned already was Evan Williams, but bottle and bond. And that's kind of the new cheap hotness that's floating around right now because it's $16, I think, $15 at least where I live. And it's a pretty tasty one, but I didn't include it in my tasting because I did 6 in my blind tasting, and it, it's a lot to drink, and your taste buds start to die off a little bit. And the other thing I wanted to say too is this is all subjective, right? It's my opinion, your opinion. We all have different taste profiles we're looking for. And even from day to day, depending on what you ate, depending on what the mood you're in, all that stuff, right? You could be what you like today may not be what you pick up tomorrow, right? So,
exactly.
So this is not a comprehensive. Jeremy and Adrian said this is the best bourbon of all time or best whiskey of all time.
We're not professional tasters or anything like that. Totally amateur. And mentioning burning out taste buds, I've got a little fridge in my office here, and I'm going to grab a palate cleanser of some sort because I'm not sure I've ever had 7 whiskeys in a row.
You definitely need a little water or something to.
Yep. You got some sparkling water here. It is flavored, but it'll have to do. It's what's handy.
It's pretty mild too. So, so if we start off with some definitions, right? So American whiskey is a distilled alcohol that comes from cereal grains, right? So it's fermented and it's distilled. And one of the things you mentioned earlier, there's not really much else that talks about what whiskey is, right? And there's whiskey all over the world. So Scotch is a whiskey, Irish whiskey, Canadian whiskey, Japanese whiskey has come on really strong in the last 10, 15 years, I believe. I actually have some French whiskey that is very, very unique, very sweet. But it's, so whiskey is essentially fermented cereal grains.
What is that? That's called Armand.
Something like it's almost like Armenstall 1790. It's almost like French Revolution or something.
No, just a name for it, just not the brand, but the like generally they're not, they're cognacs, right?
No, it's still a whiskey.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's
I
still a
thought
whiskey.
cognac was just French. Okay, there's
No,
a lot I don't
so
know.
cognac's a whole other thing. I think cognac, and I'm not a cognac drinker. Cognac is a distilled wine. So instead of coming from cereal grains, it's coming from grape.
A grape. Yeah, yeah. No, you're right.
So one of the things you mentioned earlier is bourbon. So there actually is no geographical requirement for bourbon. I think a bourbon is an American style, but it's actually 51% corn. And then it's aged in new charred oak barrels. So that's the definition of bourbon as far as I'm aware of. And so Kentucky is obviously the center of the bourbon world, but you can make bourbon all across the country. There's nothing stopping you from labeling that whiskey as a bourbon, as long as it's 51% corn and it's aged in new charred oak barrels.
Is there an age requirement?
I didn't see anything. I want to say it was like 3 years, but I could be wrong on that. But I didn't find that right off the top of my research, but I'm pretty sure it was 3 years, because I was kind of surprised when I did not see that.
Yeah. Yeah, because I recall hearing that there's some kind of age requirement. And I know with rums, you've got añejo and solera, and like different words mean different amounts of ages. And there's a whole lingo and industry stuff to learn and grok there.
Yeah. So my understanding is from the aging, they're not allowed to put an age statement on there. Well, let me backtrack. The age statement, if they put an age statement on a whiskey, it has to be with the youngest whiskey that's in the bottle. So if you're doing a blend of some sort and it's got a 3-year and a 5-year and a 7-year whiskey, the only thing you can put on there is a 3-year whiskey. So the next thing is corn whiskey. So that's apparently 80% corn, and that's generally not aged. And that's that white clear stuff that you see in the liquor store. I'm not a big corn whiskey fan, but it seems to be becoming more and more popular right now. I think one, it's cheaper because of the aging is not required. We're obviously in the middle of a huge whiskey boom right now, and things that cost $20 or $30 10 years ago are costing $80, $90. Just due to supply and demand, especially as you talk about things that need to be aged 7 or 8 years. That's a long time to ramp up. And there was some issues, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago with Maker's Mark, where they wanted to essentially change the style so that they could stretch they wanted to change the proofing so they could stretch their bourbon a little bit further.
Oh, wow.
And there was a big outcry about that. Because they were going from something like 50 proof down to 40 proof to stretch their
the
dollars.
New Coke of the whiskey world.
Essentially, yeah. And so there was a huge outcry. They all backtracked off of that, et cetera. But we're catching up to hopefully a stable spot where prices are going to stabilize, et cetera. Malt whiskey. So that's a mash of 51% malted barley. So I believe that that's what a Scotch is going to use as a malted barley for Scotch. And then you also have rye whiskey, 51% rye. And then you've got wheated whiskey, which is 51% wheat. So basically those names, bourbon, for whatever reason, is 51% corn, but we don't call it corn whiskey. Corn whiskey is 80% corn. But all the other grains, it's basically the majority of that mash bill has to be whatever you're calling it. The other thing is they're supposed to be distilled no more than 80% by volume, and then barreled at no more than 125 proof. And then you can only add water when you're bottling it. So again, if we go back to that Maker's Mark example, I believe what they were doing was essentially adding water as they were bottling it out of the barrel.
So you can't add flavors and stuff like that.
Right, you're not supposed to be adding to American whiskey
or pomegranate whiskey or something like that.
I think that kind of changes what they can call it. However, the weird thing though is I think Scotch can actually add coloring. to their product.
Caramel coloring.
Yeah, but I don't believe American whiskey can. I could be totally wrong on that.
I've always noticed Irish whiskeys tend to be a lot lighter than all other whiskeys.
Yeah, and I think Irish whiskeys are also they're I'm going to show my ignorance here, but I think that they are.
We're all learning.
Yeah, I think that they're not aged as much in general. So Scotch tends to be aged quite a bit more. One, because it's a lot cooler in Scotland, obviously, and they're also not using new oak barrels. So a lot of that flavoring from the barrel has already been removed from the bourbon or the whiskey. So a lot of times, all the whiskey producers in the U.S. ship their barrels over to Scotland so that the Scotch distillers can use that in their product. So it's kind of a weird relationship there, but
it's like an ecosystem.
Yep. Yeah. And sherry. So, I mean, sherry finished scotches are a big deal, right?
Port finished bourbons. Yeah.
Yep. So you've got all of those things that hey, we take whatever this was, and then we move it to something else and put some more alcohol in it and see what we can get to come out of it.
One of these I have was port finished. I think it's the only one that was finished in a different kind of barrel. So
does it say anything on the label? Do you have the label in front of you?
Nope. The bottles are behind me. They're over here on the table. I can go grab those once I reveal the identity of these bourbons, and whiskeys.
Okay.
But yeah, right now, all I've got are the glasses.
Okay. So one of the reasons I kind of wanted to step through the whole, the other thing we missed is Tennessee whiskey. So this is the one where there is some legality around what is a Tennessee whiskey. And I believe this was just passed several years ago. They have to use the Lincoln County process, which is essentially a filtering through sugar maple charcoal before they put it in the barrels. So there's only 4 distilleries that can make Tennessee whiskey today. And that's Jack Daniel's, George Dickel, Collier and McKeel, and Benjamin Pritchard's. The interesting thing, though, is that Benjamin Pritchard's does not have to follow that process because they were grandfathered into the law. So they were granted an exception.
How does rule even matter then?
Right, exactly. And that's where a lot of people said was, well, wait a second, you created a definition, but the people who were in the state threw such a hissy fit that this one distillery was going to be left out that they just included them in. So
and that was 4, right? So
yeah.
1 out of the 4 doesn't have to follow the process. You only got 3 other ones. So
it doesn't make any sense to me.
One of these I have is made in Tennessee, but I believe it's labeled as an American whiskey. Let me go check.
Okay.
For all I know, it could be made in one of those distilleries you mentioned. No, they just call it small batch whiskey.
Okay.
Yeah, they don't claim it's Tennessee whiskey or anything like that, but.
Yeah, and I don't know if they can they say made in Tennessee or something. I have no clue, but the term Tennessee whiskey means it has to follow that sugar maple charcoal filtering process, except for Benjamin Pritchard. And
it sounds like marketing BS to me. Does that sound like marketing BS?
Yes, it does.
That's marketing BS.
So one of the interesting things, though, that's happened recently, actually just within the last week or so, is actually, last Thursday, July 11th, in Missouri. So I live in the Kansas City area. I actually live in Kansas, but it was pretty big news across the state of Missouri, is that they just signed a bill that defined Missouri bourbon. And so the federal standard we've already kind of talked about, but the Missouri bourbon specifies that everything has to be mashed, fermented, distilled, aged, and bottled within the state of Missouri. The other interesting thing
so no buying juice from where is it, Indiana?
Yeah. MGP is in Southern Indiana.
Yeah.
The other strange thing is the other really big national distiller, McCormick's, is actually in Missouri, about 45 minutes away from where I live. So the kicker, though, so the law goes in effect on August 28th of this year, so in about a month. But the other two things is, one, all of the barrels must be grown and manufactured in the state of Missouri.
That's a bit much.
Well, so apparently
the wood has to come from there.
Apparently, Missouri is the largest cooperage state in the U.S.
Cooperage.
So cooperage, people who make barrels.
Oh.
So if you're a cooper, you make barrels.
I didn't know there was a word for that. It's like luthier for musical instruments.
Exactly. Yeah. So apparently Missouri was already there, right? They're already making all these barrels that get shipped all over the country.
Huh.
And probably even internationally, but they put that in the bill. But the other kicker that is very unique is, starting at the beginning of January 1st, 2020, is all the corn has to be grown in this state. And so they kind of grandfathered in everybody who had like Kansas corn or Iowa corn or Indiana corn for the rest of the year.
Right.
But said, starting January 1st, if you're producing product that you want labeled with this, the corn's got to come from the state of Missouri. So everything of the entire process has got to come from the state of Missouri to be labeled as a Missouri bourbon.
So they're kicking off an industry for themselves there. They're trying to grow a tourism industry, trying to keep as much of that revenue within the state.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And create a brand, right? Marketing. I mean, just like we talked about with Tennessee whiskey, right? There's, you have to follow these rules. Here we go. We can label this thing as a Missouri bourbon. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to be any good or not, right? That's totally dependent on the distiller and their capabilities. But so something new coming down. And then there's another group called the American Single Malt Whiskey Group. And they are pushing at the national level to define the American single malt whiskey, just like we talk about Scotch and their single malt process. So there's some interesting stuff coming down the pipe, I think, as we talk about definitions and marketing for all of these products, et cetera. So how's your tasting coming?
I am done.
You're done.
I've gone through all 7.
Wow.
Notes. I haven't revealed any yet.
Okay.
But I'm interested too.
Okay. Do you want to go first? You want me to go first?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll go.
Okay.
Since I've just had these, it's all going to be top of mind. All right. So this first one, I said it was hot, rough, not terrible, but not tasty. And it burned for a while after drinking it. And as I would have guessed, it is a higher proof one. It's a Wild Turkey 101. I thought I enjoyed Wild Turkey 101 more than that. So that my comments there surprised me a bit.
It is. I mean, it is definitely a little hotter. And I had a Wild Turkey rye, which apparently is not 101, but I did not include that in my list. So.
Okay. Yeah, so that's 21 proof is not nothing. So the second one here, I said nice round flavor profile, sweetness, burns in the nose like wasabi. So I kind of like this because it wasn't like burn in the throat, didn't make me want to cough and have to drink some water. It was more like you got to taste some flavor, and it just kind of rose up through the sinuses and came out, like wasabi does, when you have a little bit of wasabi, not when you have too much, not when you mistake it for guacamole.
Yeah, I've done that one time.
my wife actually convinced my mother-in-law that it was guacamole, and she had some fun with that. So this was Jim Beam, and I believe, let's see, so this is the Jim Beam bonded.
Okay.
100. So this is also 100 proof.
Yes. So anything bonded in bond is going to be 100 proof. And I think there is an age requirement on bonded in bond. And so maybe that's what I was thinking.
Bottled in bond.
Yes.
It says. So what does that mean, bottled in bond?
So I believe it's going to be they all have to be bottled at 100 proof. And I think it's a minimum of 3-year aging.
4 years. It actually explains it on the side.
There you go.
Bottled in Bond Act of 1897 declared a level playing field for bourbon distillers, one distiller, one distilling season, and 4 years of patience. Okay. Yeah, so that I'm surprised. I would not have normally bought this. You know, a lot of the mainstream stuff, I just kind of skip. You know, like more interested in the smaller guys, or at least I know some of the smaller guys are actually Jim Beam. You know, some of these bigger distilleries. You know,
it's a craft name in a big distillery. So
yep. So that's number 2 is Jim Beam. I like that one. The third one I guessed was a rye, nice nutty flavor, not too hot, and that was the 1792.
Okay.
So that's an old favorite. I like the 1792. I think most people I've talked to agree that that's a really good value. Number 4 I liked. You know, at this point, you know, like my palate, my taste buds are getting mixed up. Said nice middle ground, not too hot, but not, you know, not a lot of burn. And that was 4 Roses. So yeah, I would expect 4 Roses to be, you know, not too much, not too little, you know,
pretty smooth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's something that they've, you know, really engineered to be a palatable whiskey. Number 5, I think was probably my favorite. Super interesting flavor, lots of stuff going on. Like I didn't even have space or time to write everything that I was thinking. It was a lot to take in. And this is the surprise one. This is one I definitely wouldn't have bought. And the guys at the liquor store, none of them had tried it either. And it's mostly because of the label.
Yeah.
It's Redneck Riviera. So this is the one from Nashville. I think the company that makes it is actually from Portland, but
that's hilarious.
It's bottled by Redneck Riviera Whiskey Company in Portland for Redneck Riviera Whiskey Company Nashville.
Whatever that means.
I don't know what that means. 95% American light whiskey aged 2 years, 5% American whiskey aged at least 1 year. So it's a very young.
Yeah.
I'm really surprised that was that good. Small batch whiskey with vanilla honey smoothness and a subtle oak finish. I would have never bought anything. It just says, I did get a hillbilly one that had hillbilly on the label, and it was actually pretty decent too. So,
yeah.
So that's another big surprise. So yeah, maybe they're it's not moving off the shelf, and that's why they told me they're really interested in me trying it. But that was second surprise so far. Jim Beam and Redneck Riviera have been my favorites. All right, so number 6, spicy cinnamon, nice, a bit hot, was the Evan Williams. So that's the.
Is it the normal Evan Williams or?
No, the single barrel.
Okay.
It's the Evan Williams single barrel.
Oh, I've got a bottle of that sitting downstairs. Has not been open for 3 years. I probably should go test that then.
And generally, you know, I've had a lot of this. I consider it a really good value. It says put in oak in 2011. So a bit more age, probably where that spice and that cinnamon is coming from. Spent a long time in oak. And then the last one, smooth, hot nose, reminds me of number 2. And number 2 was Jim Beam, and this is Bowman Brothers.
Not heard of that.
Now, I'm not sure I've ever tried Bowman Brothers before. I've seen a lot of it. I want to say one of the bigger distilleries makes this. It's Virginia, Fredericksburg, Virginia, Smith Bowman Distillery. So maybe not. So this one, I like this one quite a bit.
Okay, awesome.
So yeah, I'd say my top 3 were the Jim Beam bottled in bond, the Redneck Riviera. It's just really hard to say that without Googling. And then Bowman Brothers, which they actually have one that's about $10 more, and it's port finished. This is the one I thought was port finished, but I think what it was is for $10 more, you get the port finished version of this.
Okay.
But this was very good, so I'm sure that port finished one, and this one's 90 proof. I'm sure that port finish is really nice.
Cool. So I went. I already had some stuff at home, and I went to the liquor store thinking I was going to buy 3 bottles, and then I saw that they had Buffalo Trace and Weller, and those two are stuff that's flying off the shelf these days for whatever reason. Some of the forums I'm participating in, whatever, people cannot find this stuff a lot of times. And I actually made a comment to the guy who was stocking the shelves. He's like, I just put that out this morning. So, and the funny thing is, I mean, Weller was $18.99 a bottle. The Buffalo Trace was $23 a bottle. So it's definitely the 2 cheapest ones that I got. I also sampled the Knob Creek Knob Creek small batch, Bullet Rye, Elijah Craig small batch, and the 1792 small batch. So those were the 6 that I participated with in this thing. So all the ones I have are ones I think you can find pretty much anywhere in the country, right? They're nationally distributed. Right. I'm not sure I've seen the Redneck Riviera one, so I may have to go check.
I wanted to try at least one. We've got Chattanooga whiskey as well, but I already knew I didn't like their lower cost one. They have some other interesting ones that I'm a big fan of, but they're in the $60 range. But I wanted to try at least one that was kind of local to me.
Yeah. So I did my tasting the other night, so I'm not going to sit here and drink a whole bunch of them, but number 6 for me was Buffalo Trace.
The bottom.
Yeah, it was, and nothing was wrong about any of these, but I certainly learned after looking at my top 3 what my tastes are. Mm-hmm. And Buffalo Trace is a pretty mild, kind of like you were talking about Four Roses, right? It is a pretty well-known taste profile that's not going to offend anybody. Right. It's a very easy to drink one. Number 5, which kind of surprised me, was the Bullet Rye. Just rye tends to be a little bit more spicy than a bourbon, a corn-based bourbon. And I do like the flavor, but yeah, that came in number 5 for me. And then number 4 was the Weller. So again, the Buffalo Trace and the Weller, which is flying off of shelves, my opinion, I guess you all can have them because they were nice to me, but it's not something that I was like, oh, this was amazing. Knock my socks off. I definitely want this again. So then we get into my top 3, and there's definitely a common theme between all of these is that they're all small batch and they're all pretty high proof. So I definitely like that taste profile that comes with that. So small batch is generally, the distiller looking for a, slightly upper quality taste versus just blending all the barrels together. It's a select set of barrels that they're blending. So number 3 was the 1792. Like you had before. I thought this was great. I'm not sure I've ever had this before.
Oh, really?
And price point for me was $28, I believe. And then number 2 was the Elijah Craig small batch as well. That was very tasty. And both, I looked at, the colors for all of them and everything. I didn't really let that sway my opinion, but the colors were definitely darker on the smaller batches, I thought, in the higher proofs, which makes sense, right? Because there's not as much water in the higher proofs. And then my favorite, which I've fallen in love with over the last couple of months, is the Knob Creek small batch. And yes, this bottle is small because I already had it from another set. But again, in my area, you can get the 750 milliliters for about $28. So
yeah, same here. That was I almost got one of those, but I've had I think I've had the rye before, the Knob Creek rye.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I just remember being in college and hating this stuff.
Mhm.
I don't think I could have. There's just something that, my palate was not mature enough to handle that.
Or maybe it was the way you were drinking in college.
Maybe. And I did drink everything neat, if I've got a decent whiskey of some sort, I'm gonna attempt to drink it neat instead of, put ice or put, some other soft drink or something in there with it. But it is really hot these days. I'm sure it's hot where you are as well. And
Yep.
so it was a little bit of effort to drink all this whiskey when it's really hot. And you're like,
Yep.
I just want something cool.
It's not unknown for me to put on a hoodie down here in my office because all my windows down here face the backyard, which is heavily wooded. So I really only get sun for 1 hour a day in the late afternoon. And I've got an AC vent right above me. And it stays pretty cool down here, but it's that much more a shock when I do venture out into the daylight.
Awesome. Well, that about wraps it up. Unfortunately, Mark couldn't join us this evening, but hopefully we'll get some thoughts of his on the next show for this topic, and we'll kick it off. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate you.